Cześć! Okej. To będzie moja pierwsza prezentacja w języku polskim i that was a very bad joke. I shift gears, switch into thinking in English. You only have to do it for an hour, and then everything else is going to be in Polish. But I am not ready to give a presentation in Polish yet. And I'm already doing something that to my mind is insane. And in some ways it fits, because it fits into the theme of what I'm talking about today. I was at Agile by Example many years ago as a speaker, and I went to one of my friends' talks. You all know Andy Brandt, right? Brilliant guy. And he gave a fabulous talk. And I congratulated him afterwards. And one of the things he told me really stuck with me. I have no idea what he talked about. I didn't learn a thing from it. I can't remember the subject. But I remember what he told me afterwards, which is that he hadn't rehearsed. He just knows this material so well, he hops up on a stage with a theme and riffs for an hour. And it sounds like an incredibly well-rehearsed talk. And part of the charm, I think, is the spontaneity. I, on the other hand, am very nervous about public speaking. Sometimes I write my entire speech out and just go over it verbatim until I know all of the content. And then I try to forget it and then practice it to get that spontaneity. So I do a lot of preparation for a talk, but not this one. My preparation for this talk was mostly reflection. I did a little bit of reading, watched a few videos, but mostly reflection, lots of conversations with different people in which the subject would come up. But at no point did I decide what I was going to say on this stage during this hour. And I'm terrified by that. But it is, I think, an example of a safe-to-fail experiment that is designed for learning. And it's safe to fail for a few reasons. Number one, I'm from Krakow. So I can screw up in Warsaw, and nobody back there will know.
You know we are recording, right?
Depending on what happens in the next 45 minutes, we might have a conversation about that. I didn't sign anything. I've spoken to Agile by Example before. You folks, most of you folks know me. This is a small audience. It's a friendly audience. And so if I completely blow it, I will just slink off of stage, and that will be the end of it, and nobody will ever know. Cameraman, nobody will ever know. So, but what I want to talk about is, and what I've been thinking a lot about, is learning. And I have an approach to learning which has evolved over time and served my career incredibly well that I want to share. But first I want to understand something about you. It's not a gorgeous day, but it is a Saturday afternoon in June. It's not raining, the temperature's lovely outside, and you're all spending your whole afternoon here on a Saturday. Why?
Free ice cream. No, you didn't know about the ice cream before.
No, really, why are you here?
Learn something new.
To have an interaction.
Face-to-face. Oh, goodness. I had my first face-to-face conference 2 weeks ago, and it was just mind-boggling to see so many faces at the same time. How many people are here to learn something? All right. You won't. Martin Florian gave a talk at my conference many years ago called No Learning. And I might be borrowing a little bit from that one just because it's still in my mind. But you're not going to learn anything today. Actually, you might have a very small chance of learning something today that you wouldn't learn in a typical conference. And the only reason for that is those workshops, which makes this experience very different because you're not just passively taking in information. Hopefully you will also be practicing some skills. And as I said at the beginning, Andy Brandt's talk was brilliant. I can't remember even what the topic was, let alone use any of the ideas he shared in my personal practice. And the reason for that is we're bombarded with information all the time. Our brain is incredibly good at ignoring everything that doesn't matter and then quickly forgetting everything that we don't use to make space for other things. And so, at least in my experience, I can't go into a problem-solving situation and solve the problem based on something that I read someplace or heard at a conference. Take a moment, think about the last conference you went to, the last conference like this, the last real in-person conference, and for some of you it might have been a while. Can you remember what the last conference you went to was?
ACE.
Oh, that was really recent. Okay. Okay, you've got it? Now, think about one thing that you learned at that conference which changed your career, which became part of your toolkit, which made you a different person, a better person at your job. And I'll give you a moment, because this might be hard. Can you think of one?
Does it have to be the last conference or any conference?
That's pretty broad. The last conference. Okay. Does anyone have one? One thing that they learned at a conference that changed their career? What was it?
Just if you ask for it, if you ask for something, you can have it. It's just this part, like experience that if you don't ask, you will not have it.
And what did you do with that information? Somebody told you that if you ask for something, you can have it. What did you do with that information?
I'm more grateful.
Okay. So you used it, you did it. Something else that you learned at a conference that changed it. This is gold, by the way. These are going to be the very best ideas you hear from this stage, and they're going to come from the audience, because these are the things that somebody remembered and it changed their career. Something else. Yes?
Several years ago, that the mobile phones will be the next big thing. I mean, the smartphones, applications and other stuff. And you changed the career at the time.
Okay, that's a great one. That's a great one. Just staying on top of industry trends, staying ahead of industry trends. Anyone else have a good one? Yeah.
I have discovered, during one talk, I have discovered that I'm missing a piece of information that I didn't have before, and I was given the path to plug that hole. I was like, this career changed for me like 180 degrees.
You know, that's something that, I forget who the author of Training from the Back of the Room was, but one of her points that I think is really salient is that you learn best when you can connect it to something you already know. And so you were learning about something that you knew, and then it went someplace that you didn't expect it to go. And so you could make that connection. Mm-hmm. So I think I want to draw a distinction between experiencing something or knowing something and learning something with a couple of stories. And these stories I took from marching. One, scurvy. People who are denied access to vitamin C get this horrible disease called scurvy. It is the biggest killer of sailors throughout time. The first known written description of a cure for scurvy comes from a Chinese sailor, probably a captain, who wrote in his journal in 453 AD. So we've known, it has been known among humanity, that eating lemons and oranges cures scurvy since the 5th century. And yet, in the great age of exploration, the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, the leading cause of death, in fact, more than half of all sailors on long voyages died of scurvy. It was known in Europe that lack of vitamin C could cause scurvy. There were some captains who insisted on bringing fresh fruit and vegetables and stopping to get fruit and vegetables, and their ships didn't get scurvy. And other captains in the same navy were losing 60, 70, 80% of their sailors on a long voyage to scurvy. Captain Cook was one of these. He used to bring sauerkraut on long trips. he was famous for people surviving on his ships, and he told everyone why. And it was still a huge problem. The Spanish Navy institutionalized carrying vegetables nearly 100 years before the British Navy did. And the reason for this, actually I won't get to the reason because I want to share the other example. The other example is there was a doctor in Vienna in the 19th century, early 19th century. Can't remember his name, but I wrote it down. I did write it down. There it is. Semmelweis. I always forget this name, Semmelweis, but I'll never forget the story. So it turns out that in Vienna they had a problem with infanticide, mostly infanticide of illegitimate children. And so they created these public institutions in which they had free maternity care, and there were benefits associated with delivering your child there, and state benefits. And you didn't get the benefits if you didn't deliver your child there. And this gentleman was supervising 2 of these units, and he noticed that there was a huge difference in the fatality rates of mothers between one and the other, like a huge difference between the 2. And he tried to figure out why it was. At the worst of them, they had fatality rates sometimes as high as 18%. Women would fall on their knees and beg not to be assigned to that place. It was known as the place where you go to die in childbirth. It was terrifying. And he tried to dissect what was different between these 2 places. Their practices were the same, their equipment was the same, everything was the same except for the people. Because one of them was staffed entirely by midwives, and another one, also staffed by midwives, was also a teaching hospital for doctors in training. And because it was a teaching hospital, they also had lectures and autopsies. And the conclusion that he drew is that somehow the doctors participating in the autopsies were somehow bringing something of the dead people into their work. And he had noticed that you can get rid of that nasty smell of decaying flesh by using a particular chemical mixture that had chlorine in it and such, basically soap. And he used his position of authority to insist that all doctors wash their hands after doing autopsies. And pow, the mortality rate went down to exactly the same one as the other hospital. Amazing, right? Amazing. It didn't last very long. They ridiculed him. They forced him out of the position. They went back to doing the things the way they used to do them. He got a position in another hospital, implemented the same rules, had the same effect, wrote a book about it. And the medical community humiliated him, wrote horrible, horrible things about him, there were articles, there were publications describing what an imbecile he was. It got really violent. He was sending nasty messages out. He started getting really stressed, very nervous. He was writing open letters to the medical community, calling people idiots and imbeciles and murderers. And eventually he got so stressed out, so nervous, that he was put into asylum where he was beaten to death by the guards. And this is the interesting thing. Why? Why with direct evidence in both of these cases? Look, this guy's got scurvy. He eats a lemon. He's fine. Look, these people are dying. You wash their hands, they stop dying. You can see it, you can document it, you can share it. The reason why it took both of these lessons nearly 100 years to catch on and be institutionalized such that all doctors wash their hands and all sailors travel with fruit is that they both went counter to prevailing wisdom. Everyone knew that diseases, whether it was death in childbirth or, after childbirth, this was a kind of a lingering thing. I forget what it was called, but it was a lingering death. Or scurvy or what have you, was caused by something inside the body which was going wrong with the balance of the humors. So it was common prevailing wisdom that even if you had 2 people with the same symptoms, the cause was different. People were unique. Something had upset the balance of their humors. And so every single time a doctor would work with a patient, that doctor would have to try to figure out what uniquely happened to this person in order to cause these symptoms. And they didn't necessarily consider, if they found a cure for it, that cure could be applied to a different person, because that person's has different imbalances of their humors. It wasn't until the germ theory of disease was discovered that finally, oh, that makes sense. Still didn't explain scurvy, but it made sense to wash your hands. And that got me thinking. And this is actually just something I thought about this morning when I was talking about this with my wife. And that's the difference between the way we learn and the way children learn. It seems like as an adult, I mean, we all know children learn faster than adults, right? I have a theory that that's because by the time you've gotten to this point in your life, you've seen almost everything you're going to see. You've got a standard set of solutions to problems. They may not be good solutions. They may be quit your job and find another job because I can't deal with this or whatever. They may be have a fight with the person I love. They may be bad solutions, but you've got something that you do as your go-to way of dealing with everything life throws at you, and there's not a whole lot of new experiences. And that means in order to learn anything, you have to unlearn something else. Whereas a child knows everything that they don't know. The child knows that they don't know everything. And so every new thing that they learn is just filling this gaping gap of hole of experience that they have. And I think that's the thing that makes it difficult. And that's the reason why I think it's so important to actually practice. So I know that we in our community love learning. We love learning. We're in a rapidly changing environment, technology, yada, yada. Everybody around us is smart. I mean, it's really hard to be the smartest person in a room when you work in IT. And even if you are, you probably deeply suspect that you're not. And yet, I see something that I call education porn. You know, just learning just to learn. Taking all of your free time to watch conference videos. I've got a colleague who watches conference videos every single day. It's like she has an ongoing conference that is just part of her life. And I'm thinking back, like we were talking about this. I just touched the microphone, sorry about that. We were just talking about this. You could go to a conference, you might listen to 20 talks, and you're lucky if one thing sticks a week later. There was a Saturday Night Live skit back when I was a kid in the 80s, Father Guido Sarducci. One of the episodes he did, Father Guido Sarducci's University. And it was a university in which he would teach you everything that an average university graduate would remember 1 year after graduation. In 5 minutes, you get a degree. Microeconomics, supply and demand. What else do you remember from your microeconomics course? Right? So just consuming all these blog posts we follow at the conferences that we go to, and I think it comes from a place of insecurity. Like, I have to do all of this in order to keep up. But the truth of the matter is, when you actually look at your toolkit, when you look at the skills that you bring to work, it's probably a pretty small toolkit. Like, most people have half a dozen go-to ways of dealing with retrospectives, for example, if they run retrospectives. They don't do it on the fly every time. They've got their go-to. If there's a conflict, they've got their go-to conflict management technique. Is it the only conflict management technique? No. Is it the best conflict management technique? No. But it's theirs, and it's the one that they use. And so we acquire these skills actually pretty slowly. So I like to distinguish 3 kinds of learning, like learning activities. One of them is learning a new skill to expand your toolkit. And I think that's different than the learning we do mostly because I think of an insecurity or because we believe everybody else is doing it. And that's just trying to be exposed to lots and lots of ideas so that you don't sound like an idiot in the room when somebody mentions worldly mapping. And I think that it works well to approach those 2 things differently. I said 3 because there's a third one, and that's learning for pleasure. Like when I read history, I read a lot of history. I'm not going to use it at work. I just enjoy reading nonfiction. So that you just do for pleasure. But in terms of the learning, the other 2 categories of learning, one of the things I want to share is this idea that perhaps if you identify whether this is a skill or a set of knowledge that you want to incorporate into your toolkit in order to improve your career, there's one way of approaching that. And if you just want to expose yourself to a lot of ideas, recognize that and maybe use a different approach. Because things like conference talks are very long. If it takes an hour, you might get an idea out of it. Books, ridiculously long. Reading a book you're not going to use, it's a whole day of your life. And I see this so often. I see this on LinkedIn, and it drives me nuts. The 20 books that every Scrum Master has to read. I interview authors as part of my hobby, as my podcast, and I meet so many people who are famous in the industry, the go-to people for this thing, and they wrote the book on it. If you really understand the contents of one good book, you can build a whole career on it. The author did, right? Well, there's that. There are bad books out there. Listen to my podcast. I'll tell you which one are the bad ones. So if you read a book and you don't change your behavior, you've just wasted a day of your life. You could have gotten that same information from an abridged book summary, from talking to a friend who read the book, so you don't have to. Or if you just want to be exposed to an idea in a book, like wordly mapping, for example. Well, that's a big one. I don't even know if there's a book on it, but Cynefin. There's so much to know about Cynefin. You could deep dive into Cynefin and just be a Cynefin expert and never know enough about Cynefin and its applications. But if you just want to know what it is, you don't have to read a book on it. You can just watch a 15-minute Dave Snowden talk. And so I think those kind of things are valuable. They're valuable because they allow you to see what's possible. So for example, pretty much all I know about wordly mapping, I've mentioned it 3 times now, is I went to a conference years ago and Simon Wardley gave a talk on it. Could I do wordly mapping? Not a chance. I'd have to go to a workshop, I'd have to practice. I don't want to do wordly mapping, but I do appreciate the fact that if somebody's trying to predict the future of a technology, and how that technology is likely to evolve over the next decade, I know, hey, we should call a person who knows how to do wordly mapping, because it's the thing I know about. And so I would separate into 2 things. Number 1, set aside some time to just skim blog posts. When a friend goes to a conference, ask them what they remember from it. That's 20 hours of their experience. If you had those 20 hours of experience, you probably wouldn't remember any more. Ask them what they remember from it. Pow, you've just benefited from the learnings of a conference. But then, on the other hand, decide what you want to do to change your career and do it deliberately. Deep dive. Find the good books, read the books, but then change your behavior. Decide how you're going to apply it. Because I think there are 3 essential components to actually taking something from an idea in somebody else's head to an important part of my work toolkit for conflict management or whatever it may be. And that is disciplined practice, which is what I'm doing right now. This is my first disciplined practice in impromptu speaking in a safe-to-fail environment so that you can have done it and learn from the experience. The second thing is you need to reflect on it. What went well? What didn't go well? Where did I get stuck? I should have memorized that name. I shouldn't have had to check it on my pocket. If I just memorized that name, that one thing wouldn't have happened. Reflect back on it. What went well, what didn't. And also, rapid feedback loops. We learn magnificently from rapid feedback loops. And I learned this in a very, very powerful way. When I was learning about one of the challenges in language acquisition, Japanese people have an incredibly difficult time saying the English sound R because they don't have it in their language. And so they don't have it in their head. They never hear it as a child. So the sound R doesn't even register in their ear. You make the sound R and they hear L. It's the closest thing that their mind can recognize to it. And so it's one of the biggest challenges in teaching English to native Japanese speakers, and they've discovered a ridiculously simple way to do it. You play the sound R or L over and over again, they repeat it, and if they do it right, a green light turns on. If they do it wrong, a red light turns on instantly. You give them instant feedback, and any Japanese speaker can start saying the letter R within 5 minutes. It's not a linguistic trick. It's not telling them how to hold their tongue, what to do with their teeth. It's just instant feedback. So quick feedback loops, we know this. And so my recommendation would be decide what you want to learn. Now, that's not the easiest decision to take. It may be motivated by a problem that you're dealing with immediately at work. It may be motivated by an opportunity which you don't feel ready to grasp. But you've all heard this notion of T-shaped people, right? You know, a person who has deep skills in one area, but shallow skills in a broad area. That tech lead who can also do test automation if necessary, and could also write specifications if necessary, or what have you, so that they understand the various roles. I want to introduce you to a concept that I think is really powerful, and that is the pie-shaped person. A person who has deep skills in 2 areas, and especially, and this has been tremendously useful for me in my career, especially in 2 areas that rarely go hand in hand. So if you want to become the best in your field, if you want to have a world-class career, one way to do it is to become one of the 10 best people on earth in whatever you do. Easy, right? But another way to do it is to become somebody who is deeply skilled in 2 areas that complement each other that nobody else has thought of. For me, I started out in anthropology. I had 7 years of anthropology training. I did my specialization in business school in business anthropology, and I never ever worked as an anthropologist. Many years ago, David Hussman once wrote to me. He said, "Are you a real working anthropologist?" And I thought, you know, the number of people who get anthropology degrees who actually have anthropologist in their job title is so close to 0. Anthropologist isn't a job, it's a discipline. And for the same reason that, how many of you have computer science degrees? Are you real working computer scientists? No, but your study in computer science has an impact on how you see the world and how you solve problems. And that's an impact that your employer may value. And in my case, I've always been leveraging that anthropology. So I go into an organization, they say, what do you bring to this organization? And my anthropology training is one of those things that I bring. I bring a different way of seeing. You've got all these business people here, you've got all of these tech people here. How many social scientists do you have around here? We have a different way of looking at problems. We have a different way of working with people. And that's something that your organization can value, especially when I'm doing things like coaching, or my last gig, which was an interesting one. And I think this is the next thing I want to get into, which is this idea of learning at work. If you go to work for a paycheck, any job will give you a paycheck. And you're in computer science. If all of you were fired on Monday, you could have jobs by Wednesday if you wanted to. So if your job is only giving you a paycheck, you are missing an enormous opportunity to advance your career. Your employer owes you an education. They owe you challenging problems that you can tackle in order to expand your toolkit, expand your experience base, because you're not going to be there forever, and your next job won't be better if you didn't learn anything on this one. And there's 2 ways to go about doing that. You could do it the safe way, which I would recommend, which is if you find yourself tackling the same kind of problems and doing the same kind of work day to day, like you're just coding web application in PHP after web application in PHP. 10 years from now, you're not going to be a great PHP developer unless you're doing more and more challenging things. There was a guy in Krakow. For the longest time, years and years and years, there was this old man who was busking on the same street corner on Rynnyk. And every time I was on Rynnyk, he would be there playing the same tune on a harmonica. And it was terrible. Do you know him? He's disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. But It was a long time ago, but for years, this guy would spend hours every day playing the same tune on the harmonica, and he never got good at it. So it's possible to practice in a way, and he probably didn't have the feedback loops. But it's possible to just do the same thing and never actually get good at it. You have to stretch yourself. And in every single one of your organizations, there is something going on around you, some problem that somebody else is dealing with, that you could get permission to get a hand in and help to solve, and therefore expand through actual experience your skill kit, your skill set, and what you can bring to your next employer. Or you can do what I do, which is kind of the crazy way. I have never in my life taken a job for which I was qualified, even remotely. Even remotely. And I like to share this 'cause I'm still doing it. And a lot of people feel very uncomfortable with this. Statistically, especially a lot of women are unlikely to apply for jobs in which they don't match all of the qualifications. Men less likely. Not going to get into that, there's reasons. But, for example, my first job, straight out of university, undergraduate degree in anthropology. There's nothing you can do with an undergraduate degree in anthropology. It's absolutely useless by itself. So I just took a job from a friend, and I learned so much on it. My job was sweeping the floors in a prison kitchen and making 5 meals a day for the 5 diabetics in the prison. And because I just didn't know what else to do, and the kitchen was being run by the husband of the woman I'd been working with when I was at university, and so he just gave it to me. But within 9 months, I was running the operation, and then they offered me my own facility in Illinois, which is where I ended up getting my MBA. So it's the way I escaped from my college town. But I learned 2 incredibly important things on that job. Incredibly important things, because by the end of it, within 9 months there, I was running that operation, and I was responsible for feeding 1,500 prisoners 3 times a day on time with a good meal, or else there would be a riot. And my labor crew were all prisoners themselves. So I was running basically a chain gang in a kitchen, and they all had knives. And the 2 things that I learned on that job that have been indispensable to me, number 1, how to cook, because my wife hates cooking. Learn how to cook. It's a wonderful, wonderful skill to have. Me, I learned it from a cocaine dealer who owned a hotel in Colorado and was caught running heroin across the border. And that's why he was stuck in Texas. Wonderful man named Mr. Garcia. Very nice. He considered himself to be a baker first and a cocaine dealer second. And the second thing was management. I learned management in prison because when you're a little skinny guy, fresh out of university, I was like, 21, 22 years old, and there's all these big guys in orange, and you have to make them do what you want. You learn people skills really fast. And what I learned is that the best tool for getting what you want in a prison is kindness and respect. You can't give them money. You can't give them toys. You can't give them anything. Their lives are completely regimented, but what they don't have nearly enough of is kindness or respect. Give them a little kindness and respect, and they will do anything for you. I have funny stories about my prison time, but I don't have time to talk about them now, but you can catch me another time. And so what I learned from that job is how quickly I can learn things at work, and how quickly I can move into different positions. So the other thing that's consistent in my career is I never end up doing the job I'm hired to do. I just use a job to get in. And once I'm in, I'm like, oh, these are my skills, and that's interesting. And there's been so many times in my career when I've had a job title. Like, for example, when I was at HSBC, my job title was Scrum Master. But everyone called me their lead agile coach. I mean, their lead Kanban coach. Because I was the one who was training everybody in Kanban, and who all of the other Scrum Masters were coming to in order to help their team do Kanban better throughout the entire organization. I should have asked for the actual title. It probably had a higher salary attached to it, but it didn't occur to me. But so what was it? So the next one, oh, this was a great one. I had never taught before, but I also had never traveled. I had this degree in anthropology. I knew I wanted to see the world and to travel, but I didn't know how to work abroad. So I took a job as a business lecturer in Poland. Never had lectured in business before and never had traveled. And there's a whole nother set of stories there. I did some ridiculous things, but none of them hurt. And at some point in my career, I really regretted not fiddling with my Atari more. Because my friends who fiddled with their Ataris were all now doing work in this exploding field of computer science. IT was huge. There was this huge boom in Silicon Valley. Everybody was being successful in computer science. There wasn't nearly enough people to do the work, and I had zero experience in computer science. But I did have experience in event planning, because I'd worked in event planning in South Africa and in university. When I was doing my MBA, that's how I paid for my MBA, was doing event planning for the university. And I thought, well, planning an event is not that different from planning a software project, right? Project management is project management. Yeah, you laugh, you frown. That's how I got my first IT job. I went to a small company, 30 people that had just gotten a huge influx of financing. They needed to find a project manager. And I convinced the CEO of that company that all of my experience in project management, even though none of it was in IT, was relevant to his business. And I got a job as an IT project manager. And I came into this, and this is the great thing, I was terrible at it. But I came into this organization, and this is like 30 years ago. I looked at what they were doing. I looked at all of the steps involved. I put them all into a Gantt chart. I put it on the wall, and everyone says, oh, it all makes sense now. You're amazing, Paul. You've brought order to our worlds. It doesn't take much. But that's where I learned about IT. I spent a year there. Then I came here, started my own company, and learned as I went. When I started training, after I left Lunar Logic, I started training. And at this point, I had like 15 years of experience in building web startups and mobile apps using lean and agile techniques. And I was a Kanban trainer. But the moment you become a certified trainer, your clientele changes. So when I was just training on my own, I was charging 100 zloty and getting nice folks like you to come and say, yeah, teach us Kanban. The moment I became a Kanban trainer, I was charging $2,000, and it was the huge corporations that could afford me and were sending people. And so I found myself inside of big banks, big insurance companies and such. I was telling my stories, and eventually they caught on, all of your stories involve 6-person teams and 3-month web projects. I don't think you understand our world. It's too complex, there's too many dependencies, there's too much hierarchy, there's too much regulation. Your ideas, this lean thing, this Kanban thing couldn't work here. And I believed I could, although I know that in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they're not. And so I got a job as a Scrum Master in HSBC, which deliberately, I was looking for the worst place I could possibly find that wasn't Comarch. And that's not to say that HSBC is a terrible place, but I wanted to find a place that was big and old and highly regulated and with lots of dependencies and old legacy systems. And I had no idea what I was going to find there. But again, I sold them on the principles of my experience, even though I had no direct experience working in this kind of organization. And in 2 years there, I gained all of the stories that I now tell about life in big organizations. It's been terribly useful to me. And most recently, I was offered a role as a product coach. Product coach. I never considered myself a product person. Somebody said, we need a product coach. And I thought, product is big. It's big and it's booming and it's exciting. And as an agile person, as a Kanban trainer and such, I have just about mastered the ability to get a backlog out. High quality backlog turned into predictable features with high throughput. I can do that. But the vast majority of things that I've built have failed. The vast majority. When I was at Lunar Logic, we were building tons of web applications for these excited, eager entrepreneurs who sold their van or borrowed money from their mom, and now they're going to build the web startup that's going to change the world. And in that role, I got to see over 120 people build products that died within months on the market. And so I thought, this is interesting. This is something I want to learn. I know how to build great products. I mean, I should say I know how to build products well. I don't know how to build the right product. And I thought again, this is something I want to learn. But how do I convince anyone to let me be a product coach when I've never even been a product manager? And again, leverage experience. I've never been a product manager, but I did build, run, and sell a SaaS company once. And I guess most of what I was doing there was actually product management, even though I had no training in it. And I wasn't doing product management for those 120 odd products that I did with Lunar Logic, but I got to see 120 other people doing product and work closely with them day in and day out and see everything that they do wrong. I know more ways to fail at product management than any product manager. If there's a product manager out there who has personally product managed 120 failed products, they're fast. And I'm an anthropologist and a coach, and the word coach is in there. So I went in and I interviewed for the job, playing up my experience working with product managers, not being one, and my experience coaching, although not coaching product managers. And I got the job. And my thinking here was, if I want to learn product management, I could go in and say, I've never done product management before, I want to try it. And I could get some job as an assistant or associate product manager, so junior product manager, what have you. And maybe after a couple of years, I would learn how one product gets designed end to end. But as a product coach in a multinational large company, I can work closely with 14 experienced product managers and learn with each of them. As the coach, they're only going to be coming to me with the real problems. And so I'm going to be helping to solve only the problems, not doing any of the boring stuff. And so my point that I'm trying to illustrate here is that throughout my career, what's worked really well for me is developing a couple of disciplines. Product is now my next leg of my what's maybe an M-shaped person, because my legs are lean agile, anthropology, and now I'm building a product leg. Because one of the big things that people hate about a lot of the lean trainers and the Kanban trainers and coaches and stuff out there is that they're so process, but they don't understand the product work. And that's also one of the big criticisms about product people, is that they're all vision, and they don't understand the needs of what they need to do in order to contribute to an efficient and effective lean organization. And so having those two legs seems valuable to me and well worth 2 years of my life to get in the trenches, get the stories, do the work. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is having a small number of things that you do incredibly well, very deliberately, are worth investing time into learning. Because, and this is the last thought I want to leave you with, most people look at their skill set and are embarrassed by the gaps. And so identify your weaknesses, work on your weaknesses, you're weak here. And this is what performance reviews are all about, right? But all of you, I'm older than most of you, and I have huge gaps in my skill set. And I always will. All of you will go to your deathbeds with gaps in your skill set. It's too big for any one person to master. But people don't know you for your gaps. They don't recognize you as, oh, that's the person that I worked with for 2 years, and he was really terrible at conflict management. No, they remember the things you did well, the reasons that you were hired, the strengths, what you brought to the company. And so there's a lot of power to be had in doubling down on your strengths, because that's what you're really bringing. So if you focus all of your attention on trying to correct what you perceive as weaknesses, you could end up being mediocre at everything. And nobody remembers or needs that person. But the person who is the one to call when this kind of a problem happens, or the one to call when they're ramping up a new team, for example, or when whatever the big thing that you're good at is, then you will always be indispensable. And so, to sum it all up, that's my learning journey. Be deliberate about what you want to learn, not too much. If you read a book, don't read another one until you've actually done what you read, because otherwise you've wasted your day. And you don't need to be good at everything. Deliberately pick the few things to be good at and then invest the time and energy, even if it means taking a job you're not qualified for and just doing it for 2 years until you're good at it. It's worth the time and investment. And the last thing I want to share is this. You've got a good opportunity here to learn something because you've got these workshops where you're actually going to be doing things. You also have 2 more speakers who are going to be sharing ideas with you. If any of those ideas resonate with you, what I want you to do for the rest of this day is try to find one thing, one practice, one technique, one idea that you think could have an impact on your career, that you would like to understand and incorporate into your work and do well. And I want you to decide what you're going to do with it and when you're going to do it. And if you do that, and at the end of the day or tomorrow morning, you send me an email and you say, this is the thing, this is what I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to do it, I will follow up with you. I've intentionally made it a little bit difficult. I'm not giving you my email address. It's incredibly easy to find, but you'll have to do a little work. And I honestly believe that probably none of you will email me. Most likely I won't get a single email. If I do get an email, it will be from a personal friend, just trying to be nice, or it will be from an ambitious young woman. Because this is one of the things that I've noticed. You have a free workshop that actually teaches useful skills. Who shows up? Ambitious young women. You have an opportunity that requires effort. Who shows up and does it? Ambitious young women. And so if I'm wrong, I'll find a way to let you know. Maybe I'll mention it on my LinkedIn or something. But my suspicion is that come Monday morning, I will either have 0 emails or I will have identified 1 or 2 ambitious young women in the audience, and that's it. And you are going to rule, by the way. Anybody who actually takes me up on this is already the kind of person who is going to have a fabulous career. So that was my very, very first. I'm 53 years old. I've done a ton of public speaking, and that was my very first unscripted, unplanned, impromptu keynote presentation.
You said something about the good ways of learning in work. Do you have some examples of bad ways?
Oh, I think the worst way to learn at work is to show up for the purpose of doing your job. If you go to work in order to do your job, the same job you did yesterday and the same job you're going to do tomorrow, so that you can earn your paycheck, then that's probably the worst way to go about learning. And there are so many people who do this. It's less common in our industry, but it definitely happens. Honestly, I think it's okay. I think it's perfectly okay if that's what you want. You don't always have to be challenging yourself. You don't always have to be changing the world. You don't always have to be ambitious. It's exhausting. And so I see these companies sometimes that's looking for these ambitious people, but there's good people who just want to do a job, and they do it fine. I wouldn't ridicule those people. If if you're happy with what you're doing, or if you're just doing what you're doing so that you can pay the mortgage and do what you really like doing in the afternoons or on the weekends, I think that's fine. But if you want to change your career, if you want to become known for what you do, if you want to have a bigger impact, if you want to solve more challenging or more meaningful problems, then just showing up to work is a waste of your time. Your company owes you an education, but you don't have to take it.
I was asking about ways of learning. You said that there is always opportunity at work to learn something, and you're gonna say about how to do it good, and you also can learn something at work, but in a bad way.
Okay, so tackle a problem. The best way to learn at work is to do things. The cool thing about work is it gives you opportunities to tackle problems that you don't have at home. It doesn't have to be at work. It can be through volunteer work. It can be through pro bono work. It can be, but find a real problem, because I think the worst way to learn is to simply consume information. So if you only read in your field and you read 50 books on Scrum Mastering a year, you're probably not learning from any of them. You might be gaining some insights about things that are out there, such that you could say, it seems like I read something about that once, which can be useful because it means that there's a thing you don't know which might apply to the problem, but it's not an efficient way to do it. So if like for example, if all you want to do is know what's in a book like Sooner, Safer, Happier. It's just like a 400-page book, and it's a pretty slow read. It's pretty dense. You could listen to my podcast about it and get everything that you'll remember about that book a week after you've read it in an hour, instead of spending the 10 hours I had to spend reading the book for the podcast. So I think it's just that. It's that mistaking consuming information for learning is an incredibly ineffective way to learn. You learn by applying knowledge to solving real problems. No number of books will teach you to play a piano. I can attest to this. Do you know how many books I have on how to learn Polish? But I don't practice it enough, and that's why my Polish is so bad. I would be better off with one book that I just worked through end to end in a disciplined way while using each of those lessons. I just learned how to order a coffee. I think I'll go down to the bar and order a coffee. See, I ordered a coffee in Polish. But no, I've read them all. But my Polish, everything I know about Polish, yes, everything I can do in Polish, I can do because I once found myself in an office with a bureaucrat who I needed something from, and they didn't speak English. So these situations I get myself into that I have to get out of them using my Polish skills, and those situations and those conversations get burned into my memory. And well, that's something that, how do you pronounce his name, Csikszentmihalyi was talking about with flow. This idea that the best place for learning is a place in which you're challenged, but the challenge is not so great that it causes anxiety, but it's not so low that it causes lethargy. And so finding those problems at which you're challenged, and yet and then this, I think he didn't use the term, but I think this is where you could think of it as safe to fail. Like here in this talk, it could have been terrible. I don't think this talk was as good as some of the other ones that I do, but it wasn't terrible, but it could have been terrible, and that would have been embarrassing. I mean, it's not like I'm not challenging myself at all, but it's also not like my career is going to be destroyed if I do a bad keynote here. So this is like a good example of that zone. I wouldn't practice my impromptu speaking skills on live television, for example. That would be too much anxiety. I wouldn't be able to function at all. But I also wouldn't do it, you know, alone in my bedroom. That wouldn't be challenging enough. This experience is going to stick with me.